Seraphina Voss had always known that she was different. She had known it the way a person knows something they were never told, quietly, deep in the chest, like a stone sitting at the bottom of a still lake. The other girls in the Thornveil Pack grew up laughing in the market square, braiding each other's hair, talking about mates and futures, and the ordinary joy of belonging somewhere. Seraphina grew up watching them from a distance, always a few steps behind, always slightly outside the circle, as if an invisible wall separated her from the rest of the world. She had silver-streaked hair, that was the first sign. The elders had always looked at those pale strands with something careful in their eyes. Not cruelty exactly, but a kind of sad knowing that made Seraphina's stomach tighten whenever she caught it. Her father, a quiet man named Edmund who spent his evenings reading old books by candlelight, never explained what that look meant. He only told her to keep her hair tied back, to stay close to home, to not draw attention to herself. She had tried her best, she really had. But on the morning of the blood moon, the night that came only once every 100 years, the elders stopped pretending. Elder Marin herself came to the cottage at dawn. She was a tall woman with white hair pinned tightly above her head and eyes the color of winter stone. She brought 4 pack warriors with her, which told Seraphina everything she needed to know before a single word was spoken. Her father stood at the doorway of their small kitchen, his hands wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold, and he did not move to stop them. "It is time," Elder Marin said simply. Seraphina looked at her father. She waited for him to say something. Anything. He stared at the floor. She had 3 hours before the ritual was meant to begin. She ran. Of course she ran. She ran through the forest behind their cottage, ducking under low branches, her boots soaking through in the wet grass. She reached the eastern border of Thornveil territory before the warriors caught up to her. They were not unkind about it. That somehow made it worse. They simply surrounded her, gently turned her around, and walked her back. She was bathed in warm water that smelled of cedar and flowers. She was dressed in white. Her silver-streaked hair was left loose around her shoulders. And then, as the sun began to set and the moon began its slow rise above the tree line, she was led to the altar of eternity at the heart of the moonwood forest. The altar was old, older than the pack, older than the elders, older than the stories that explained why it existed at all. It was built from black stone and carved with symbols that no one alive could fully read anymore. Seraphina was brought to her knees on the cold ground in front of it, her wrists tied with a rope made of silver thread, and the whole village gathered in a wide circle around her in silence. She did not cry. She had promised herself she would not give them that. She looked straight ahead, jaw set, breathing slowly, and told herself to be brave. She did not entirely succeed at feeling brave, but she at least looked it, and sometimes that is the best a person can manage. Then she heard the sound of horses. Dozens of them, coming from the north, moving fast. The ground trembled slightly beneath her knees. The villagers stirred, the warriors at the edge of the circle straightened. And then he came through the trees. Caelan Draveth, the Alpha King, was nothing like the paintings Seraphina had seen of him in her father's old books. The paintings made him look noble and distant, like a figure carved from marble. The real man was something else entirely, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, with eyes that caught the firelight and held it the way deep water holds the reflection of the sky. He rode at the front of a column of warriors, and he carried himself with the quiet, total authority of someone who had never once in his life needed to raise his voice to be obeyed. He was said to have overseen 2 of these rituals before. He was said to be the one who made sure the ancient laws were followed. He was said to feel nothing about it. He rode into the clearing and stopped. His eyes found Seraphina. Something happened to his face in that moment. It was not a dramatic change. It was subtle, barely visible. A slight tension around his jaw. A stillness that went beyond ordinary stillness. His second in command, a lean warrior named Riker, glanced at him with a sharp, questioning look. Caelan did not glance back. He dismounted slowly. He handed his reins to the nearest warrior without looking at the man. He walked toward the altar, and every person in that clearing held their breath without fully meaning to. Elder Marin stepped forward with the ceremonial knife in her hands and a calm, formal expression on her face. Caelan raised one hand. "Stop." One word, quiet as a closed door, but no one in that clearing moved. Elder Marin blinked. My king. The ritual must. I said stop. He walked past her, as though she were a piece of furniture, and came to stand in front of Seraphina. She looked up at him. She was still kneeling, still tied, still dressed in white, and she was looking at him not with fear or gratitude, but with a clear, direct, entirely furious gaze that seemed to catch him off guard, in a way that very little in the world apparently did anymore. He crouched down in front of her so they were at eye level. Then he reached out and snapped the silver rope with his bare hands. It burned him. She could see it. The silver scorched his palms red and left dark marks across his skin. He did not flinch. He simply unwound the rope from her wrists, and the moment her hands were free, she pulled them against her chest and rubbed at the marks the binding had left. He stood. He took off his heavy coat, dark wool, lined with something warm, and settled it around her shoulders without asking. Then he turned to face the crowd, the elders, the warriors, all of it. Elder Marin's voice had gone from formal to cold. This is blasphemy. The moon goddess will punish every pack under your rule. Crops will fail. Children will fall sick. This is not your choice to make. It is now, Caelan said. The girl lives. Anyone who wants to argue that point can argue it with me directly, tonight, in whatever way they prefer. No one argued. He walked back to his horse. He helped Seraphina mount, then swung up behind her, and they rode north out of the moonwood, while the village stood in stunned silence behind them. She spoke eventually, somewhere deep in the forest where the fire torches were far behind, and the moon was high and silver above the trees. Why? She asked, just the one word. He was quiet for long enough that she thought he might not answer at all. Because I could not do otherwise, he finally said. She did not know what that meant. Not yet. He brought her to Ashvale Keep, his stronghold in the northern highlands, a massive place of dark stone and tall windows that looked out over mountains. She was given warm rooms, proper food, and more freedom than she had expected, but the court watched her with cold, suspicious eyes, and whispers followed her down every hallway. Who is she? Why is she here? What was the king thinking? Seraphina had never been the kind of person who wilted under stairs. She walked those halls with her chin up and her silver hair loose, and she found the great library on her third day and did not leave it for a week. She and Caelan spoke carefully at first, formally, like two people measuring the distance between themselves before deciding how close to step. He was not what she had expected. He was not cold or careless or hungry for power. He was tired, she thought, deeply, quietly tired in the way that people get when they have been responsible for too much for too long. He listened more than he spoke. When he did speak, he was honest with her in a way that felt almost startling. He told her about the mate bond, the pull between wolves that meant two people were made for each other. He told her it had hit him the moment he saw her at the altar, a recognition so complete and certain that he had not even had to think about what he was going to do. He told her he knew the ritual mattered to his people, knew the risks of refusing it, and had refused it anyway. You could have asked me, she said one evening, quietly but directly, before you made a decision about my life. He looked at her with genuine surprise on his face, then something that looked very much like shame. You are right, he said. I should have. She had not expected that either. Meanwhile, the consequences came. Just as Elder Marin had warned, crops failed in the eastern territories. A strange sickness spread through young wolves in two of the outlying packs. The other pack leaders sent angry letters to Caelan, demanding he explain himself, demanding he find a solution, some of them demanding he send Seraphina back. His own council turned uneasy. Riker sat across from him one evening and asked the quiet, honest question, was she worth all of this? Seraphina overheard that question from the hallway. She went to Caelan that same night and told him she would go back, that she would not let children suffer because of her. He crossed the room and stood in front of her and said, with a calm certainty that left absolutely no room for debate, no, we find another answer. But you do not go back to that altar, not ever. So Seraphina went back to the library. She worked alongside Thessaly, the keep's elderly archivist, a small woman with ink-stained fingers and a sharp mind, and together they dug through 3 centuries of records. They followed footnotes and cross-references and strange gaps in the written histories. And after 8 days of searching, Seraphina found it. An original scroll, brittle at the edges, and written in older script, tucked behind a shelf of less important documents, as if someone had deliberately hidden it there. She brought it to Thessaly, who translated it word by word, her face growing more and more still as she read. The original prophecy had never called for a sacrifice. The Blood Moon Girl was meant to stand beside the Alpha King freely, to offer a bond of loyalty and love to the Moon Goddess as the true tithe. It was a living gift, not a death. Someone, long ago, an elder with something to gain from controlling the ritual, had rewritten it. And every generation after had believed the lie. Every generation had let a girl die for it. Seraphina carried the scroll to Caelan's study at midnight. She spread it on his desk. She watched his face as he read it. He went very still. He read it again. Then he set it down carefully, and when he looked up at her, something was breaking open behind his steady expression. "They knew," he said softly. Someone always knew. He called every pack leader to Ashvale within the week. He laid the original scroll before them. He named the deception clearly and without flinching. The leaders, shaken, many of them angry, some quietly ashamed, listened to all of it. Then Caelan did something that none of them had ever seen an Alpha King do. He turned to Seraphina, who stood beside him, and he took her hand in both of his. He spoke the old words of the mate declaration. Words that, once said in front of witnesses, were permanent and binding. But before he finished, he stopped. He looked at her directly, in front of all of them, and asked her, clearly and simply, if she chose this freely. The hall was completely silent. Seraphina had never been asked what she wanted. Not once in her life had anyone placed a choice in her hands and waited respectfully for her answer. She felt the weight of it, all of it, the altar and the rope and the cold stone and the long loneliness of being set apart her whole life. And then she felt something else, something warm and steady and entirely her own. She looked at Caelan and said, "Yes." The effect was immediate and impossible to explain. A warm light moved through the moonwood, visible even from the windows of the keep. The sickness in the eastern packs lifted overnight. The crops came back. The wolves felt it through the bond web that connected them. A warmth, a rightness, something missing for 300 years suddenly restored. The moon goddess had never wanted blood at all. She had wanted this. Elder Marin was exiled before the season turned. The false ritual was removed from every pack record. Caelan decreed that no blood moon child would ever be marked or set apart again. Seraphina built a hall for scholars in Ashvale and spent her years hunting down every false translation she could find, correcting records, making sure no other old lie was still quietly waiting to hurt someone. One evening, long after all of it, she stood with Caelan at the edge of the moonwood. The same trees, the same moon, a completely different life. She asked him, almost without meaning to, if he ever regretted it, any of it, the risk, the cost, the weight of it all. He lifted her hands and held them gently between his, running his thumb across the faint marks the silver rope had left on her wrists all those months ago. "The only thing I regret," he said quietly, "is that you were ever afraid." The moon rose full and silver above them both, and the forest was completely, perfectly still.